All the speakers, please come on the stage. Thank you. So we have a very long session with 9 speakers, very big diversity of topics. So, and we have a very narrow interval of time between this one and the next session, so we really should get started. Thank you. So we are waiting for Mr. Igor Barinov, who will shortly be here, and he will be our first speaker. Yes, yes, sure, of course, no problem. So Mr. Barinov is here, and he will be our first speaker. He's the head of the Federal Agency for Ethnic Affairs of the Russian Federation, and he will be speaking to us about Russia's ethnic and language policies and globalization. Mr. Barinov, thank you.
Thank you so much. Уважаемые дамы и господа.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will be speaking today on the protection of local languages in the context of globalization. In our country, there are over 190 different ethnic groups, according to recent data. And these people use in their communities 277 languages and dialects. Now that's a huge ethnic and linguistic diversity. Currently, in the Russian Federation, there are 105 languages that are considered to be local languages and that are used in our state education system. 24 languages are used as a vehicle for teaching, and 81 are studied as an academic subject. Now, that's clearly a huge load for our educational system, but at the same time we understand that this is necessary because we are very much aware that the loss of even one language would be an irreplaceable loss of our national heritage. For this reason, our aim is not to see the situation degenerate in any way. We want to protect these languages. For us, consequently, the International Year for Indigenous Languages was extremely important. Now, this year, as you know, was announced by the General Assembly of the UN. The Russian Federation, as a major multilingual state, actively supported the organization of this year for indigenous languages. The organization of events associated with the year across the world is a global process, and clearly a very positive global process. The International Year of Indigenous Languages has strengthened cooperation amongst people who care about this subject, and we need to work together in order to save languages and to take measures in order to protect and revive these languages. Such an approach has been supported across the world. In Russia, we have set up a national organizational committee, and we've also put in place a work plan whereby currently we have introduced approximately 750 events and measures at all levels, and nearly 500,000 people have taken part in these various events. As concrete results, we might mention the creation at the state level of a fund for protecting and promoting the learning of local languages in Russia. The main tasks of this fund are to find contemporary ways of promoting linguistic and cultural diversity and heritage, and the organisation of experimental and innovative work in terms of the teaching of local languages and the promotion of their literatures. The work of this fund is going very well. It's at its height at the moment. We plan to produce approximately 64 textbooks concerning the teaching of 14 minority languages. At the end of the International Year for Indigenous Languages, in Russia, work will continue. A special group of experts who are collecting testimonies and information from the local population and minority populations concerning their rights to study in their minority languages. So this work will continue. Likewise, we think it's very important to continue to discuss with our foreign colleagues in various events, including during the Permanent Forum on Indigenous peoples, which will be held in the UN context in 2020. The exchange of good practice in terms of the protection of languages is also a positive global process. We are preparing a collection of information on Russian language study practices, and we believe that this will be useful for everyone to find out about. We've created a large number of proposals on how to improve Russia's state policy on languages. In particular, this information has shown that there are a number of negative trends currently taking place that are linked to globalization. And this is some of these processes are having a negative effect on Russia, but also on other minority languages spoken in Russia. Indeed, there are a large number of languages, as I've said, that are spoken in Russia, and some of these languages are being transformed or deformed, or losing a number of speakers due to globalization. I can cite some examples, the Aleut language, the Chinook language, and the Ket language, but also other languages. Today, there are only a few tens of people of the older generation who speak these languages, and as a result, unfortunately, we are losing the linguistic heritage of some of the people who speak these languages traditionally. Now, it's very clear that in establishing a balanced policy and setting priorities at the state level, we will be able, through these policies, to reduce the risk of the loss of these languages. As a positive example, I can cite the work of the government of the Khanty-Maninsk Autonomous Okrug's government, which is taking measures to develop the local languages of its populations. Now, how does this program work? Well, the region has adopted a language entitled On the Languages of Local Indigenous Peoples, minority peoples, and it's providing financial aid, it's publishing textbooks on these languages, and also on local dialects. In this Okrug of Russia, indeed, we launched the International Year for Indigenous Languages in Russia. And we organised a conference in this context. And this also shows how seriously this matter is being taken in the region. And indeed, it shows that global processes can be used and harnessed to improve knowledge of languages rather than their loss. Dear colleagues, I would like to underline when discussing globalization in connection with languages that there are no right or wrong answers. We need to adopt a balanced approach so that we can observe both positive and negative trends and together find optimal approaches. It's important to put in place concrete measures in order to work together and to take into account global trends. Let me cite an example being held in Russia at the state level. It's called Arctic Talents Children, and it's being funded by mining companies. This is a cultural and educational program for children from minority groups in the north of Russia, Siberia, and the Far East. We are organising seaside holidays for children at the seaside, and the idea is to teach these children new knowledge and new skills in order to protect and promote their national local cultures. By sharing cultural experience, these children are learning all sorts of information about ecology, literature, and digital technology, but also much more. This year, as part of this educational program, we focused in particular on the learning of minority languages, and over 2 weeks, the participants in the project were able to study not only Russian and English, but also, of course, their local language. And the program was organized in such a way as to increase the general linguistic knowledge of Russian school children, though we focused in particular on minority local languages. Such projects, of course, show that it's possible to find a balance to help people to feel at ease when speaking their national language and their local language, and also a foreign language. In terms of the influence of globalization, it is exactly this kind of approach that I think we need to take. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to thank particularly Mr. Yevgeny Kuzmin, who's part of the, he's the chair of the Russian Committee of the UNESCO Programme for Information for All. And I thank him very much for his contribution to the protection and development of languages across the world. Thank you.
Mr. Barinov, for so beautifully compressing so much information, and especially your comprehensive report of the International Year of Indigenous Languages in Russia. Thank you very much. So I hope we'll have time for questions later on. Our next speaker is Mr. Gilvan Muller d'Oliveira. He will be speaking to us about multilingualism and internationalization.
Good afternoon. I would like to call our attention, please, next one, for a topic related to international migrations on one side and building knowledge societies on the other side, and it is related to multilingualism in universities, especially related to students' mobility. If we see these figures, we had only 50 million students in tertiary sector 1990, and today we have 200 million students. Probably we are going to have 300 million students in 2035. 6 million of these students migrate to other countries, so study abroad, what bring an economic input of 1,229 million US dollars a year. Next one. This number was only 1/3 18 years ago, so only 2 million. So we can see that this phenomenon of internationalization of universities is bringing effects on language dispersion and on multilingualism. Next one. I recommend all of us to know the instrument that UNESCO has built in the topic, and it's a wonderful interactive atlas of global flow of tertiary level students that permit to see the case of each country, to whom they, where to the students are going and where from the students are coming. So a special instrument for planning internationalization of universities. Next. Because we know science today is in the center of the economic processes. Universities are one of the most important institutions for science. Science and technologies are today language intensive, and internationalization require multilingualism. But here the opinions divide. Not everybody has the same interpretation of what multilingualism is being called here. Next. So we see that internationalization of higher education begins to be a mass phenomenon. As university becomes more and more multilingual, more there is a concentration of processes in one language, English. Students are bringing many new languages inside the universities in very different ways. These languages are of very different ranges and types, and we see that normally universities don't pay attention to these languages that are being brought inside the institution. Next. The production of scientific articles, for example, continues concentrating in English. Next. Although, for example, China has surpassed the United States in the production of scientific articles 3 years ago, we know that important part of these articles produced by China are in English. Next one. And that's why one special area inside language policy that is being called language policy and planning in science and higher education can be relevant for thinking multilingualism. Next one. I have the pleasure to be coordinating a UNESCO chair on language policy for multilingualism that includes 23 universities in 13 countries that work in 11 different languages. So one of our topics is exactly internationalization of universities. Next one. With some processes that are happening, we see danger of obsolescence of academic and epistemological traditions, loss of opportunities of multi-level academic partnerships, simple importation of research agendas, and creation of semi-literates in their mother tongues, even in those languages with academic tradition. Next one. For that reason, we are exploring 5 different aspects of how universities should take care of this question of the multiple languages in the institution. First one, what languages are spoken in the universities? Most universities don't have any instruments to measure what languages professors, faculty, and students speak. Second one, how university is using languages in its operation. I have been last year in Stellenbosch University in South Africa and saw the process of trying to use new languages for services inside the university as an example of operation in different languages. Third one, what languages are taught or are used as teaching languages in university? Then what languages are researched in universities? That are 2 very different questions. What languages are equipped at the university? Many universities are not using the main effort to equipping languages. And finally, what cooperation strategies occur in rich languages? Next one. Multilingualism is related to repertoires, more than to repertoires than to languages. How people, institutions, and communities use different languages for their life, economic production. This concept of repertoire has multiple implications for organizing universities in their tasks. And then to step from a multilingualism of languages to a multilingualism of repertoires can help us to put universities in the center of the construction of a new multilingual vision for that kind of institutions. Next one. Considering repertoires, we need to stimulate the common equipment of sets of languages, not of individual languages, so we could have better results for our application. And one important instrument for that is the construction of common frameworks of reference that permit to see the repertoires at once and to use the planning of language in the universities to do that. Next one. One concept that emerged in that area is the concept of post-monolingual research, how we are going to use all those languages that are in our university for the research, what implications it has to build a really multilingual research strategy. Next one. And so, to end, value in different senses is produced today more and more between languages than only in specific languages. The world's universities have an important resource at hand. languages effectively mastered by faculty and students in different types of mobility, but this resource is still very poorly understood and very poorly used. New models for identifying multilingualism in institutions and organizing it for the production of post-monolingual research are emerging, opening doors for diversity and for universities working with different types of language repertoire. That's why in our UNESCO chair, Language Policies for Multilingualism, one axis of investigation is multilingualism in internationalization processes. So we have the lab of multilingualism near us in our universities. We don't have to go only for field work very far, because we have in the universities a very interesting field to build new multilingual strategies. And it's important in our chair that work together with 11 different languages that we can bring results in some years of how to do that, how to use better approaches to multilingualism. I am directing a PhD thesis in this moment to analyze the multiple languages spoken by the 420 students of my university, and I hope to have some concrete results for the next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilvan. So our next speaker is Mr. Gatut Susanto. You're ready, sir? Okay, great. Would you like to come here? Okay. So he'll be speaking on language policies and globalization in Indonesia, challenges and opportunities.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for Professor Afsin Kuzmin for bringing me here, and also like our colleague from Ugra government. Really good opportunity like to bring me here. So for our session today, this is just more introduction like the situation of multilingualism and language policy in Indonesia. So I myself, I live from Java Island, and if you see the map, which is in the eastern part of Indonesia, there are many small islands. Next. So if you see Indonesia, which is Indonesia has 17,000 islands, which is if you see the map, the smaller island part in the east part of Indonesia. And I myself live from Malang, which is in Java Island. This is near Surabaya here. Next, please. And also, Indonesia has 1,340 ethnic group, which is this is like so from the west to east. We have like many local languages, many ethnic groups, many. So if you see in the custom, so this is just example from each ethnic group. So we have many traditional custom, which is one ethnic group has a different the custom. Next, please. When we're talking about multilingualism, this is Indonesia has 718 indigenous languages, which is the numbers. This is not quite, and some experts say like 750. Some experts say so. Like the number is like about, it's not quite sure yet. But in fact, with this number, which is like only around 200, which is already well documented, but the rest not well documented yet. Next. So this is like the map from 2000 from this year. So for example, if you see smaller island in the northeast, Maluku is around like 70, and then the eastern part of Indonesia, which is if you can see in the map, I myself from Java only has 10. But if you see Papua, which is the biggest island in the east of Indonesia, has more local languages. It's around like 395 indigenous languages. So this is the status Indonesia has one national language, what we call Bahasa Indonesia, which is the Bahasa Indonesia has two status, which is one as official language and the second as a national language. It could be interchangeable. So like it has a different function. Next. And at the same time also in Indonesia also like at school is taught foreign languages. So for example, English, Japanese, Mandarin, and Arabic. But many more, like on the map, on the pictures over there, this is like the foreign languages are being taught at school. So mostly from junior high school until university level. But for elementary school, just English and Arabic. Next. This is the good thing, how the situation of multilingualism in Indonesia. So as we can tell it together, which is, Indonesia has one national language we call Bahasa Indonesia. At the same time, also has many local languages, and also at school also taught foreign languages and how many different languages could be live together in Indonesia. So we call, for example, this is like the very, what do you call it, which is with the policy from government. So we call utamakan bahasa Indonesia, which is prioritize Indonesian, because as Indonesia like able to unite like all people in Indonesia. At the same time also lestarikan bahasa daerah, which is preserve indigenous languages in Indonesia, but also kuasai bahasa asing, which means master foreign languages. So like mostly students from junior high school, they at least they have like 3 foreign languages. And when we're talking about language policies in Indonesia, actually the awareness how to have one national language actually like long before Indonesia independent. So this is the in October 28th is all youth from Indonesia all together, and they unite, which is this is like one national language, what we call Bahasa. This is how to unite all ethnic group in Indonesia. Okay, next. And this slide is more talking about the policy which is made by government in Indonesia. So this is when we're talking about Bahasa Indonesia, this is is stated clearly on the National Constitution of Indonesia. So this is like the very clear the statement what is the status of Bahasa Indonesia, which has become like state. Next. I don't want to waste your time. So next. Okay. Before that, and when we're talking about the globalization in Indonesia and the situation, just like to coin of money, which is has a good side, and also at the same time also has bad side. So for example, and then the challenge how to maintain the multilingualism in Indonesia with the globalization era. So, right. Before this. All right. So this is the challenges. So number one, with the government side, so which is national and local policy. So when we're talking the local languages like a government, and because we have national government and also like a local, we call like province. So like how to work together to make the local what you call it, preserve the local language. So for example, one area they on the constitution they have written in Bahasa and in local languages too. And before that, and also about the security reason, there's also a challenge. So for example, if you want to document like a language and is part of Indonesia, because the security reason is probably the government not permitted for the scholar to go there. Next. And also the community, this is connected with the community, with the attitude of mostly with young people. And also like we, as I mentioned earlier, we do not have like accurate map of local languages. And of course, this challenge is, if we want to document all of local languages, is need more fund, need more money, and also need more researchers and also a scholar to do that. And the thing is also like less connected with this technology. This is the challenge. When we talk about like technology, for the time being, it's less connected with technology. Next. And the opportunity like this with the globalization era. So I mean, we want to do like the car over there. So technology could be like a little bit faster. Next. So what I suggest, like how to adapt the globalization. First, with international cooperation, which is interconnected with national and local policy. This would be a good thing. And next. Secondly, with international cooperation, also the government and among agencies, because conducting, collaborating among scholar and agency. For the time being, which is each agency and government not connected to each other, so it's better if you connect to each other. And also build community awareness. Some area, which is young people more proud like if they speak a foreign language than a local language. So we need to take that. Okay, thank you very much. Time is up.
Thanks to all speakers for keeping to the time. I just wish to announce that as we have a lot of speakers today, in this session, after the fifth one, we'll take a short break to take a couple of questions. So if you have any questions, please prepare them. So our next speaker is Vicente Clement Ferrando, and he's going to be speaking to us about revisiting the notion of multilingualism and its multiple approaches in increasingly complex societies.
Thank you very much. Allow me to first express my gratitude to the government of Khanty Mansis, to UNESCO's IFAP program, and especially to Mr. Thank you, merci. Eugenie Kuzmin, a person with a solid determination to bring forward the debates on multilingualism. So, spasiba. Thank you very much. As I'm prepared. Yeah, ça marche bien? Okay, parfait. Okay. We are gathered here in one of the latest or final conferences on multilingualism devoted to the International Year of Indigenous Languages. More than 800 events, as you can see here on the screen, have been organized according to the UNESCO website devoted to the International Year of the Languages. Theater plays, conferences, exhibitions, music, and many other events. This proliferation of events can be linked to the awareness raising effects led by UNESCO, by other international organizations that have worked in the same direction. For example, I remember I was also there with Adama Samasego, the International Year 2008, the International Year of Languages proclaimed by UNESCO. Also, 1 year later, the Council of Europe's 2009 Intercultural Dialogue, as I said, in 2009, only just to name a few. The results of this, this is going too fast, I think. Yeah, I'm there. The results of these celebrations are usually recommendations, declarations, suggestions, or guidelines on how to manage linguistic diversity. The reality, however, does not present a rosy picture. It's quite the opposite. Just take a look at the graph. As my colleague Gilvan Mueller said before, English seems to be I would say is replacing definitely the local and national languages as a medium of instruction at all levels of education. He was talking about higher education, but it's also primary, secondary, and higher education. As you can see here, the blue is the use of Catalan in the Catalan universities. The pink, as you can see on the screen, is the use of Spanish, and green is the use of English. As you can see, from 2015 to 2018, the latest data available, there's more and more green on the graphs, just to put it very, very bluntly. So more and more English. So Again, we talk about linguistic diversity and its importance, but at the same time, all of our universities, public universities, are using more and more English. National and local languages are still not present as language of instruction in not only countries, but entire continents. And as I am now thinking of Africa and Latin America, Adama Samaseku, Dorothy Gordon, and many other speakers before talked about that. There are more and more social and political conflicts everywhere derived from the lack of representation of public spheres of our languages. As you can see, this is the third element on the screen here. So it's related to social cohesion and citizenship. Again, Western countries are imposing tougher language regimes and language tests for immigration control rather than for immigrant integration. Language rights as part of human rights are systematically violated in an increasingly number of countries. And small language communities continue and still do not have the presence or access to technologies. I don't know if you've realized that next to the main items that I've just highlighted, I've put different keywords, as you can see here on the screen: education, social cohesion, human rights, progress, citizenship, access to information, etc. These are all the concepts related to languages, to our languages, to linguistic diversity, but also to sustainable development goals. As I speak here today, the majority of member states in the world are gathered in Madrid to discuss climate change, and they're going through the 17 specific development goals. Do you know how many references I've found to languages in the development goals? 0. So there are no references to languages. But the blame is not only on them, we have to also see what we've done wrong, I think. We, the academic community, but also international organizations, have adopted what I call a fragmented approach to the management of linguistic diversity. Linguistic diversity, especially regional, minority, or autochthonous or endangered languages, are about culture, but are about a lot more than culture. Endangered languages continue to disappear and at an alarming rate. Other languages are less and less used due to homogenizing state-building policies, and others are no longer transmitted from parents to children. The efforts by the international community are much more needed and are highly appreciated as they help raise awareness of what we are doing here today. They give visibility and help us gather at events such as this one, or the 800 events that I just mentioned before. However, this is not enough. We have tended to focus primarily on the cultural aspects of languages, but as I said before, languages are much more than that. Languages are a key feature of modern societies. They're used at the marketplace, in the classroom, in technological development, etc. Societies are becoming more and more complex as a result of the changes derived from globalization, mobility, migration, and technologies. So we must therefore rethink how we approach multilingualism and linguistic diversity. Not this, because this is going a bit crazy. Going back, not yet. We'll get there yet. Now, as I said before, I very much welcome what you have on the screen, the strategic outcome document of the 2019 International Year of Indigenous Languages, and especially its concrete proposals for action. One of them being the declaration of an international decade of indigenous languages, which would start in 2022 to 2032. This would allow us to link our language debates to the mainstream debates on sustainable development, but more importantly, to debates on today's complex societies. We must work towards a shift, a paradigm shift, in the way languages are approached. This shift will transform the status of regional minority languages from being confined only to the cultural space into being considered as an integral part of our society. Because let's not forget that any language policy is a social policy. And I was given the task of being very, very short and summarize my speech. So I think this would be a very ideal summary of what I've just talked about. The difference between equality and equity. And I think we are all here, what we want is this picture and not this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As I think we've all seen, all these presentations are interconnected, and I hope we'll have time for a good debate. So our next speaker is Dunya Brozovic, and she'll be speaking about the political implications of language policies in the Southeast Europe region. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to come here and speak in front of you. I will be going to speak today about a completely different region, in a way, a region which most of you know not for good, because there is even a word created in English language which is called to balkanize, which with not a very nice connotations, and it does have political connotations, it does have, and its background is in a way in linguistic connotations. Okay, please. If we agree that three basic functions of language are communicative function, which enables us to communicate within the group, then of course the cognitive functions, we wouldn't be able to function without that one, and the last one, which is symbolic value of language, and that is the one which is very often mostly related to language policies in different areas, especially the area which I'm going to be speaking today. Please. Okay, so this is the area which is usually called, within European regions, it's called Southeastern Europe, although there are differences if Greece is part of that region or not. And then, of course, Romania, if it is a part of that region. Slovenia, sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And very similar one, which is called Balkan region. But there is a problem, because somebody else decided to call this Balkan. It's not the people from the region. It's not us, certainly, the Croatia. And Balkan is, as most of you know, just a mountain in Bulgaria. And there is the symbolic value, which is, of course, linked with historical background and contacts between people. There is something with regards to linguistics very relevant in this region. It's called the Balkan Sprachbund, and all of you linguists know what it is. It's a term which is created for typological contacts between languages, which created some new elements in most languages. It doesn't have to do anything with language policy. It is just the reaction of multilingual areas, which in this area is actually multilingualism connected with cultural differences of different languages. Okay, next. So what are we talking about? Different political countries. And as you can see, if the Bulgaria is a center of this Balkan, and then some northern countries like Slovenia and Croatia do not make part of this area of Balkan, and especially they do not make part in any way of the Balkan Sprachbund. So it means how those languages that were for centuries in contact and those languages that were under the Ottoman rule for 500 years were in a contact and influenced each other. Okay, so very often, and especially in the Western European discourse, we are very often intent to generalize and put everything to the same group, although it has nothing to do with some parts of those countries. Okay, so what are the languages we are going to speak about? Most of them belong to Indo-European language. Most of them, of those South Slavic groups, are mutually intelligible. I mean, they understand mostly each other, although, of course, not completely. From the northwestern part to the southeastern part, no mutual understandable languages. So if we go to this picture where we see the languages spoken there, the one which is a problematic one, and since I have only a few minutes, I will maybe concentrate to this one. It is the region of so-called Serbo-Croatian language, I say so-called because it has never been a linguistic reality. It's not a language which ever existed. And if you go to any textbooks or books, most of them still use that term. And for instance, in Bosnia and Herzegovina today, the country with unfortunate history and even unfortunate recent history, we have 3 official languages: Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian. Okay, next please. Okay, so when we speak about this region, we tend to go to say that there is an official, there is a language policy of this southeastern European region. There is no one language policy. There are many language policies, and they all depend on historical and political backgrounds of certain countries. Next, please. Okay, so why Serbo-Croatian is a problem? It has never been a linguistic reality. It has been a language that has been created together with creation of former Yugoslavia, the country created after the First World War, and then after the Second World War, and it has never been created by people from living there. It has been created by people from outside, okay? So somebody else decided, never asked us if we want to live in this country. So then it lasted for 70 years. During these 70 years, a totalitarian communist, 50 years of totalitarian communist government actually was imposing this common language, and that was the way in a official language policy by which they tried to create a unified nation and a common nation. Some kind, if the country lasted for 200 years more, they will probably manage to create a new language. But it didn't, luckily. Okay. So that was a very, very rigid language policy, which affected 4 countries within the Yugoslavia, which was a federal country of 6 republics. Slovenians in the north and Macedonian in the south were not included in this proclaimed language policy of the common language with 2 variants. Okay, so after the breakdown of Yugoslavia, we have something new. We have, for instance, we have an international court in Hague which used the term BHS, or BKS, whatever, which means Bosniak, Croatian, and Serbian. There is something completely different here. Is it Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian, or is it one language with 3 names, or 3 languages with mutually understandable? They are mutually understandable, but so are Danish and Norwegian. We are not calling them Dano-Norwegian. And here, and even some other Scandinavian languages, of course, and many other languages. So why still here? Why people from, for instance, Croatia, nobody ever wanted to call their own language Serbo-Croatian? We never used that. Who has the right to impose the name of the... We have been hearing today about name imposing. This is the same thing. Somebody else decides. We should have the right to decide of the name of the language that we have been using. And this is the new reality. This is the official language policy in many universities. That's the end, okay? Okay. Okay, so just to point out, Croatian language has completely different history, has a literary history of 1,000 years in Croatian language. Only 70 years within the Serbo-Croatian framework. That we have to give away and leave aside for those 70 years. I don't think so. Okay, Bosnia and Herzegovina, completely different situation. They created a new language after the fall of Yugoslavia, which they had to call Serbo-Croatian before. Now, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's not a language marker of identity, it is a religion. Okay? So this is just to see the ethnic distribution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and after the war, it changed a little bit. Next. Next. Okay, the Serbian, the next one, which is important. So the Croats are all Catholics, the Serbs are Orthodox. Croats are writing in a Latin script, the Serbs are writing in a Cyrillic. So, but that is oversimplification to say this is a difference. They have been under Ottomans for 500 years, we have been with Habsburgs, so there was no contact, but the languages are mutually understandable. But there is a symbolic value of language, there is an identity issue. So I will not go into other languages of the Southeast Europe. The Greek situation, the typical situation of diglossia between Katarevousa and Dimotiki, but that is the internal language policy within the Greece, okay? I will be finishing, okay? Albanian also, language policy. Most of Albanians are speaking Geg language, but Tosk is becoming a standard language in both Albania and Kosovo because Enver Hoxha was from the south, okay? Macedonia and, okay, the last one just the last one. No, after that, okay, so the last slide that we should be able to think about, and thank you so much.
Yes, let's take a few minutes to take some questions, please, so that we can react to the 5 papers that were presented. Any questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Julia Sarivanov, and I'm from Hungarian ELTE University. I'm doing research on linguistic politics. And my question is addressed to Mr. Vicente Melferrando. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, first of all. And you noted that currently there is a very much fragmented approach to managing linguistic diversity. And I absolutely agree with this. And that political decision makers should think about languages as a much broader thing than just within the frame of culture. What do you think, which is the way forward? So, for instance, shall political decision makers, let's say, emphasize the role of languages in any kind of political debate, let's say within the framework of sustainable development, of other fields, or the human rights approach shall be reinforced, or maybe an international instrument, standard-setting instrument shall be adopted, or national instruments shall be implemented more efficiently.
Thank you. Please keep your questions short because we don't have that much time. Thank you. Sure, please. Would you like to answer? They are working now. Okay, fine.
Do they work? Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. I think just to be very short, because we have to hurry up. The word would be mainstreaming. When we talk about social cohesion, then include languages in social cohesion. When we talk about sustainable development, we have to include languages in sustainable development. When we talk about the economy, we have to include languages in the economy. So it's about mainstreaming, not only being confined, for example, as we are, sorry, but we are here today, whereas the whole thing is taking place in Madrid, in the conference. We would need to be there, as you know, languages in sustainable development. So mainstreaming would be the answer, to be very short, as we have to be now. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Dorothy.
To our colleague from Croatia, can you, I mean, you've given us the history of it. What happens practically now in terms of language policy? What is happening in school? You know, in all the dimensions that Vicente just gave us, how are you coping with this?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, we never had a problems in schools. We always were teaching and speaking the same language, and it has been called Croatian. Only historically, during the times of Yugoslavia, some words that were called, that were only Croatian and do not exist in Serbian were forbidden. So you were not able to use them. So after the break of Yugoslavia, some of those words, which are in dictionaries which were published centuries ago, Croatian dictionaries under Croatian name, they were returned, they were given back to the normal use. And so that was called a nationalism, although they are recorded in dictionaries, in literature, in everything. The only problem with them was that they were not known in Serbian. But the difference is not only on a lexical level, you know, the difference is much more profound in some areas, which doesn't mean that they are not mutually understandable. But that's why I pointed out those three functions. So for us, the things did not change at all. And for them too. It's the same language which they used in school and what we used in school. Somebody from outside is still calling it, in all the universities, Serbo-Croatian.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just one more, please. Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
This may be a general question to all of you on the panel. What we see in language policies, you know, from the African side, is resort to official language policy, which I see a lack of acknowledgement of the importance of multilingualism and diversity, and there may be acknowledgement of we don't have capacity to manage that diversity. Now, how do we, though the official language simplify things, management, but we lose a lot by this. How can we address the issue of official language policy, mostly even depending on colonial languages being imposed on the people?
Well, the idea of official languages was to simplify things in the model of 19th century states. And the concept of norm or standard is to circumscribe diversity, to make diversity less important. So that instruments were the instruments used to construct monolingualism. Now what we are thinking about and what we want to develop is new instruments. For example, instruments for officializing multiple languages. So we cannot, maybe we cannot build the 21st century multilingualism with the same instruments that we have used for building states in 19th century, in the beginning of 20th century. In that case, we should propose another treatment for diversity, internal diversity for languages, for example. And I think many of us here, many of people here are exactly proposing, experimenting, and developing that kind of tools for the new multilingualism.
One last question. Adama? No, thank you.
Je peux parler en français?
Do you mind if I speak French? Do we have simultaneous interpretation? Very well. I feel more comfortable that way. I just wanted to make a brief comment about language policies. First of all, many thanks to all of the speakers for their edifying presentations. I would like to speak with Ms. Dunja Brozovic-Rončević. I completely agree with what was said by Gilvin regarding the history of official language policy. Nonetheless, we've already resolved that issue to an extent within the African Languages Academy. It's worth highlighting that the African Language Academy is a one-of-a-kind institution. It was set up by heads of state from across the African continent, and it addresses continent-wide policy, the objective being to recognize the languages in all of their diversity. So we have a specific approach, and that is conventional multilingualism on a friendly basis. In other words, all of the languages spoken in our various countries are considered as potential official working languages. Now, how do we manage all of that? Well, at different levels. There are different levels at which we can take action and levels at which we can use languages as instruments. So this policy of conventional friendly multilingualism is managed by various agencies, administrative agencies. So at every level, the identity-based language, the language that really speaks to the identity of a village or a municipality of a region, is the focus. And then we see how that can dovetail with the official languages which are spoken. So at the national level, for instance, in Mali, this is how we manage language policies, and some of these languages, as I said, are used as official languages, working languages. That's how we manage it.
I'd like to take a moment to announce that Mr. Barinov will be leaving us now, and I'd like us to give him a big applause for a very interesting presentation. Thank you. So thanks everybody for very, very good questions, and I hope we'll have time for some more. So we now move on to the next 4 presentations. Julio Jatoba from Macau will be speaking to us, One Center, One Platform, Translation and Information Accessibility Challenges in Macau.
Dear participants, it's a great honor to attend this very important conference. I would like to express my gratitude to the organizing committee, the UNESCO, the government of Khanty-Mansick Autonomous Okrug, Russia Federation, and the European Language Resource Association. I would like to say special thanks to Dr. Evgen Kuzmin and to Dorothy Gordon for all kind support. Thank you. Well, according to the basic law of Macau Special Administrative Region, Chinese and Portuguese are the official languages. In theory, this makes it possible to provide service in both languages in public service. In practice, due to the lack of qualified works in Portuguese, the public service is almost exclusively offered in Chinese or English. However, with the increase in trade between China and Portuguese-speaking countries and the adoption of the One Center and One Platform policies, there has been an increase for service in Portuguese language and, as a result, an increase on training of Portuguese translators and interpreters. That is my work area. Well, considering this scenario, I will present Language Technologies project in Macau and discuss the training of specialized bilingual personnel under the orientation of One Center and One Platform. Next slide, please. Okay, according to United Nations data, 2016, the Portuguese is the language of less than 1% of Macau population. Of course, these numbers do not exactly match the reality of Macau, since they represent the origin or the ethnic origin of the population without taking account their second or third language. In addition, dealing with language surveys is a big challenge. I speak from my own experience in China, since often the surveys respondents tend to consider their mother tongue or their first tongues, the language used in their formal education, instead the language spoken in their own houses and communities. Next slide, please. Okay, taking account these very basic numbers of Macau, let me talk some of the challenges of public translation in Macau and highlight some of the challenges of multilingualism in Macau. The depth of this topic I cannot cover in less than 10 minutes. So what I will do today is present some considerations that will serve to discuss the urgency of the participation of new actors in the language policies decision. So what is One Center and One Platform policies? In the 5-year development plan of the Macau Special Administrative Region 2016-2020, Macau states, as one platform, Macau can provide professional, intermediary service in language, finance, laws, and accounting for activities related to social and cultural exchange, trade and investment, and industrial and regional cooperation between mainland China and Portuguese-speaking countries. And what is one center and one platform objectives? Still according to Macau government, the objective is speed up the process of developing Macau into a world of center for tourism and leisure, as well as economic and trade cooperation platform for China and Portuguese-speaking countries, realizing moderate diversification of economy development, strengthening competitiveness so as to achieve sustainable growth and continuously improve people's livelihood. The plan will cover areas in make city favorable for living, working, moving around, travel, and leisure. Well, just for reference about Center for Tourism. If you count the number of tourists in Portuguese, sorry, please get back, not yet. Yeah, this one. If you take in account the number of tourists in Macau, if you put all together Brazil, Portugal, Mozambique, Angola, and the other Portuguese-speaking countries, is almost the same number. But the fact is Macau is almost 19 square kilometers. So it's a very small space, but tourism, it's very important for us. Actually, the casino is very important for us. So, yes, because why it is important? The money of casino return in research and return and benefits for the population. So that's very important. It's very important for our education. The education system in Macau is making huge improvements because the casino money. Okay? So, next slide, please. This one. Regarding the objectives of one platform, it's worth to mention that the statement of Macau can provide professional intermediary service in language. To meet this demand, Macau has been at the forefront in technology for learning Portuguese as a foreign language and in training Portuguese translator. That is two of the new APP for learning Portuguese in Macau and other languages. In recent years, the number of trilingual government service mobile APP and number of Portuguese language learning mobile APPs has been growing in very fast pace. However, the project of translation technologies that I will comment today goes back at the last decade. So next slide, please. If you look, this is a more common online translator. The first one, I think everybody used at least one time in their life, Google Translate. But there are also the Microsoft Ping that is very popular in China. And the next one, please. This is the online translator in Macau. With years of material and human investment, today the Chinese-Portuguese Translation Technologies project has split into two. One is focused in general public, open access, is this one, and one for government needs, that's not open access. The open access resembles in format and content to Google Translate, as I show you, and Microsoft Ping. And we call automatic translation, or some people call online translation. I have just 2 minutes, so okay. So the next one, please. This is just the result of the first one. I have no time to comment the translation. That's my area. But if you speak some Portuguese, that's very interesting. Because this is almost literal translation. This is almost that Google Translate offered to you. So next one. Next slide, please. And this one is the CAT, Computer Assisted Translation. This is not open access. Next one. So that's the difference. You can make a project and you can create your translation memory. And if you look on the right side, you have more than 30 possibilities to choose a specific area, like for vocabulary or for format text, like law, tourism, publicity. So it's very specific one. Well, as my areas of professional interest is Chinese Portuguese, translation analysis, I would love to comment these translation outputs, but I have no time to do this today, so I will point to some practical problems and possible solutions for making information technology in Macau even more effective, enabling offer public information for all. So, Macau, next one, please. Well, this is some of the results of this is much more better. If you speak Portuguese, you feel huge difference. So, Macau is doing great progress in language education, language technologies, and in promote more inclusive language policy. Of course, Macau still has a long way to implement all necessary adjustments to achieve their language education goals. But I'm really confident that Macau is doing very good and very intense job to achieve these goals. So, next, please. So this is one of the challenges of language education and technology in Macau. I write the lack of skilled professional. The problem is computer technicians do not know about language, and linguists don't know about program. That's the big challenge. And even if they know some program, they don't want to do this because they consider less academic. So it's a big problem of academic vanity. Next one, please. Lack of linguistic representatives in decision-making on linguist policies and language technology. That's not the problem. The linguists, the academics are more interested in their career than work in the daily basis, work for the community. They are working for make numbers, like publish, or whatever. If it's couples or web science, it's perfect. But if it doesn't count any academic points, the linguists are not interested. So I have no time. So could you just the last one? The Portuguese, Chinese, English up, and the other language in Macau is facing down. The problem is two-phase organism. On the other hand, the scope of communication between government and residents who do not speak Portuguese, Chinese increase. Because the people that do not speak Chinese, they're working, or Portuguese in Macau, their work language is English. So the problem is, it contributes to diminishing the promotion of other languages. Last one. I have no time, right? No. So maybe, you see the last one, please? Okay, merci, спасибо, obrigado, thanks, 谢谢.
Yes, we shall move on to the next speaker. Thank you, Julio. Our next speaker is Ana Raquel Matias, and she will be speaking to us on multilingualism and international migration. Totally different topic again, so we are really covering a lot of territory.
Thank you. Let's see if I manage. Okay. Thank you. Is it possible? Okay. Thank you. First of all, I would like to express also my gratitude for this invitation. It has been an opportunity to exchange and to know some research and some issues that are concerning different parts of the world. And for me, it's also an opportunity to share with you one sociological point of view on the impact of language diversity in our societies. Okay. Thank you. So my proposal here is to discuss briefly the role of language, but in a specific view as an instrument for social exclusion and control, as Vicente has also called attention before, in current Western European policies, which are imbibed by individuals' ideologies on language and on ideologies on linguistic diversity. So to start with, I would like just to give an example. Go back, please. Go back, please. The case of LADO, which is a language analysis for determination of origin that has been applied. Now you can go forward. Okay. It's a new branch of applied linguistics used by governments in processing asylum seekers who are applying for refugee status, and used as a method for helping to establish the nationality, region, or ethnic origin of third country nationals and migrants. So this is applied in some Western European countries and not just, also in Canada and other countries. And it has been used specifically for third country national migrants in, as you can understand, in very vulnerable situations. Applicants are interviewed by government agencies seeking to ascertain whether they speak the language of a group they say they belong to, as a part of testing their claim to come from a certain nation, region, or group. But also, it may also be performed as a part of the appeals process for claimings which have been denied, or there is to say, in return proceedings of irregular migrants. So we are talking like language can be an instrument, together with others, to profile individuals in vulnerable situations, which are not exactly in safe spaces to be profiled in their language experiences, with huge consequences on the individual's opportunities. So this is, please don't, the one before. This is the work that Laura Garcia has shared. She has studied on this in a panel that are organized in an international conference on migration and silencing of languages in Santiago. And she is the one who I could give others examples of previous tests that citizens from third countries have to apply before coming to European Union countries, or integration tests that they have to do in European countries, so to be assured that they have residence, or national citizenship tests that are related to language testing, profiling. So there are many examples. Also, there is also a need for profiling language and individuals when language policies are being put into place. For instance, to teach the national language, like the French, the Spanish, or the Portuguese language for those of third country nationals. And there has been a lack of references and framework to really understand what I would say. There is a need of what was said before as a post-monolingual approach to these issues. So I would like first to focus on the complexity of individuals as speakers, as was said before, speaking more of repertoires and not just on language. And then I would change to ideologies that still inform language policies in Western European countries. And when I say Europe, I'm sorry if I don't refer specifically Western Europe, but that's what I'm referring to because it's the territories that I've been studying. So the complexity, sorry, the next one. Okay, this one, okay. I study the linguistic consequences of migration phenomena through a sociological point of view. And to understand that these phenomena are processes of social changes that imply linguistic conflicts. One example, in not such a clear way as the one before, is the increasing number of Spanish speakers in the United States that in some issues are not seen as a peaceful issue and as a peaceful demographic change, for instance, but we could see other examples also in Europe. And these linguistic conflicts are reflected on both groups and individuals' experience, ideologies, and narratives. And for this, I will first focus on, please change, the complexity of individual sociolinguistic profiles that I think it's necessary to take into consideration when we are profiling. Please, thank you. Individuals' relation with language are related also with the generation that they belong to and where they are placed, not just as migrants, but also in their country of origins. We talk about demographic cohorts. Children, parents, and grandparents have different relations with languages, as we have seen in some cases before. Migration cohorts, that means not just the ones who migrate here and then descendants, but also in the country of origins, where migration is also influenced and structured the society, which give individuals, depending on the position that they place as in different generations, in a group, in a family, and in a community, they have different contact with linguistic diversity, which is in presence. So it implies that individuals have different linguistic socialization experience that are related to different spaces and times. For example, an individual in Nigeria today will not have the same contact as an individual with the different languages as in the 90s or in the 60s or further before or will be in the future. Different life stages, it depends if individuals are going to study, if they are studying and working at the same time, if they are forming family, if they want to make social mobility processes, if they have citizenship strategies which give them rights, and languages can be associated with this, giving individuals rights and the opportunity to plan and structure their life in the future and for their descendants. So, 2 minutes, okay, thank you. But this is not helping. Yeah? So we are talking about the complexity in accessing mother tongues, second languages, national language, and foreign language, which is not a straightforward issue. And to understand the importance of language in the individual's lives, we need safe places to talk with people and to make them share their experience to be sure that we are understanding their really linguistic profiles. So there is still an unsolved problem because there is also no systematic data available. There is a gap between the official image and the existing sociolinguistic diversity, scarcity of statistical data, and different demographic criteria that is applied. And many languages in this official image are not taken into account because they are said to be no national, no territorial, no regional, no native, and here no Western European, when in reality, please, they are arguments that are more political and not so much related with the demographic, historic, and sociolinguistic reality of the territories. I put here an example of the presence of Arabic, Russian, Turkish, and Mandarin norms and the standard norms in European territory, but they are not so commonly included when we talk about multilingualism. Mandarin more recently has been included in educational system of many European countries, but before this it wasn't. So this is one point that I think we need to construct in terms of reflecting on European history is the construction of language alternative or otherness. And this is a sensitive issue, I think, but where Europe has not been having a critical view, and I'm finishing. European historical, European historical lens and its expansion in the globe have been producing otherness and linguistic racialized subjects. And first, we know, unfortunately, history as speakers of non-human inferior languages. There was a period of European history related to the dealing of language diversity. Then, as speakers of inferior language in terms of human development, and as speakers of language with vocabulary deficits in terms of what is school and academic language and economical global market needs. So I don't know which situation are we now, but when we are dealing with some, I'm making a critical view on this, of course, and I'm saying that this is, a deficit approach that has been applied to no European languages, and it has been applied when we think about what are the language values that exist for the different languages that exist today. So to finish, you can put all the 3 points. There is a need for critical language awareness informed by the history of international language contacts between countries and cultures. And we need to understand the impact of language in society. How can we do this if we keep silence individuals' linguistic biographies? And we should ask the role of researchers in current policies intending to control borders when we are silencing language and as a consequence we are silencing speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Professor Siva Prasad from the University of Hyderabad. I apologize to the other speakers for not announcing their institutional affiliations. I was just trying to save a little bit of time. Okay, so please, come, sir. Unlocking Indigenous Knowledges and Languages.
I'm here today thanks to Dr. Kusmin. In fact, I'm an anthropologist. I'm more interested in looking at the way indigenous knowledges are affected because of the decline of indigenous knowledges. Please, can I have that? You see, I'm not talking, I don't want to take much time because when we look at language, language is important for transmitting the knowledge because through oral communication, indigenous communities pass on that knowledge. And community, if it cannot continue its language, that affects not only the community, but also the whole set of things that are linked with the language. That's why existence of a continuity of language is important for the survival of culture and important for the survival of knowledge. It is also linked to the resources because it is here. I wanted to have a small pictorial diagram or in a thematic diagram. I would like to show that. Here, resources, knowledge, and livelihood, they are basically related to indigenous languages because most of the indigenous languages are territorially linked. If you remove their territorial control, that leads to destruction of that community, language, and everything, and including their livelihoods. So knowledge about the resources and its upkeep is also important for sustainable livelihoods. And it's also important for sustainable development. So there is a very intricate relationship. So therefore, any attrition of a language basically leads to destruction of knowledge, leads to destruction of culture. Next one, please. That's it. Oh, sorry. And now, why language becomes important because the specific words that are used by the communities, they have specific meanings, specific concepts. They cannot be transliterated into other dominant languages because they convey something different. In fact, as we know, the cognitive understanding of the people, the same word or the same kind of way they classify the material cultures differ from community to community because of the kind of uses that they have. So therefore, attrition becomes an important element to destroy. And therefore, endangerment of a language is also endangerment of cultural knowledge. And so another thing I want to tell you is, it's not that, you see, this is another important thing, that the dominant languages are responsible for the endangerment of the languages. Now the same dominant languages say we must study and carefully protect endangered languages. It's very irony. And because we cannot preserve languages. It's not like a museum specimens. Once that is gone, means gone. So what we need to do is we need to allow the communities to use the language, not to impose other languages. And so languages survive only when the natives are allowed to pursue them. Next one. Okay. In fact, the indigenous languages by themselves have tenacity to sustain themselves. And in spite of, you see, not having a script, for centuries it survived. And that means what has happened was there was a kind of existence of different languages in harmony, not trying to dominate over the others. This whole process started with the colonial expansion. And in fact, that is the process of endangerment of indigenous languages. And if you look at the post-colonial governments, they have not done anything better. In fact, they pursued the same policies. And in fact, they have further exacerbated the process of endangerment. Now, indigenous communities, languages, and resources, therefore, become under very severe threat because people are interested in the resources of the people, not in terms of other things. So the same dominant groups, now they want to say they want to protect indigenous languages and the knowledges in the name of endangered kind of. This is paradoxical. And this is what I wanted to just tell you. If you look at the government and dominant powers and the external agencies, they impose their languages and they take over the resources. So if you look at the upper half of the pyramid, upper half, the external agencies and the governments are interested in only that. That means they are interested only in the resources. They are not interested in anything else. And if you look at the indigenous communities, they are interested in the indigenous knowledge because they have knowledge about the resource. That is communicated to language. Therefore, what happens is that has link also with the livelihood. If the knowledge is gone, or language is gone, knowledge is gone. Knowledge gone means resources, livelihood is gone. Resource is linked. Resource knowledge is different because there are communities where people use different kinds of the same resource is used differently by different people. What we call ecological niche. In the ecological niche, protects the resources without affecting. That means different communities, they live in the same area, geographical area, but they still sustain, they survive. That diversity, multilingualism survives because of that. So this is where I just wanted to tell you, it just gives you very in a crux that how important for us is to look at the resources and language and the knowledge and the livelihoods. Because livelihoods, if the resource base changes, livelihoods also changes. Because the resource base, the knowledge about the resource base no longer is usable. If it is not usable, then you cannot pursue the livelihoods. And that is where the, I'm no problem, I'll answer that. And what we are looking at is, there is a kind of policy, if you look at the governments, their policies are affecting the language of the people. Like, for example, the government, even the census we have in India, it doesn't take any speakers less than 10,000. So that means most of the speakers who actually use the language are the people, are the indigenous. Their numbers are less, so their languages are completely gone. And in fact, what is happening is, we wanted to transform the indigenes in the so-called mainstream. We want to bring them in. I always call this mainstream as the gutter. We wanted everyone to be in the gutter. And this is what the problem is. That means our eagerness to make them as clones of ourselves is the basic problem. And the idea of monocultural and monostructural thinking, because everything we have to be like this. We have structures, political structures, all structures are destroyed because of that. And people have their own ways of managing and things. So the indigenes, on the contrary, respect biodiversity and linguistic and other diversities. So their approach is more helpful for sustainable development and to combat environmental changes. And you have a lot of things. I have detailed papers. This is the last slide of mine. So what is that we can do? It is important for us to protect the indigenous languages and their cultures or knowledge, because it has immense potential, immense kind of ideas to combat this so-called environmental degradation or climate change. This is another big business area now. And I don't want to go into the polemics of that. And in fact, what is that we can do is, if we do that, we can really contribute to a better world, and we can contribute, that is, the development we can avoid all the pitfalls of the so-called development that we are doing today. And that is being pursued by the governments. So the existing laws, the policies, we need to alter them. More suitable for multilingual, multicultural, and multi-knowledge kind of societies. And that is when we can have, thank you very much.
So thank you for keeping to the time. Our last speaker in this session is Professor Ildis Bakashova from the National Library of the Kyrgyz Republic. Please.
Добрый день всем.
Good afternoon, colleagues. At the outset, I should like to express my gratitude to the organizers of this high-level forum, and specifically, of course, Evgeny. I wish to thank you and your entire team for all of the hard work you put into trying to resolve this issue. Now, the topic of my presentation today is promoting linguistic diversity in the cultural and educational sphere in Kyrgyzstan. The Kyrgyz Republic is a singular polyethnic country which covers the central part of Eurasia. It contains a lot of cultural and linguistic diversity. And here you have some photographs from my country. 90% of the Kyrgyz Republic is covered by mountains. For many centuries, over 80 different ethnic groups have lived in the Kyrgyz Republic. We have the national cultural centers working in the Kyrgyz Republic. We have an association of the peoples of Kyrgyzstan. They learn and help to learn the languages of the various ethnic groups. We also have a national program for enhancing language policy, as well as a policy document aimed at promoting polycultural and multilingual education in the Kyrgyz Republic. The great writer Chingiz Aytmatov said that a language is the mirror to the soul of each and every country. Kyrgyzstan stands at the crossroads of the West and the East, a crossroads for languages and cultures. It is the final frontier reached by European civilization, and this can be seen through the multilingualism and polycultural character of the Kyrgyz Republic. As things stand today, we do have multilingualism in the Kyrgyz Republic. It's a real treasure trove of information where we can learn about the culture of the various ethnic groups living in Kyrgyzstan. It contains our history. It's also an instrument for socialization, for self-expression, and for the transfer of social and cultural traditions of ethnic groups. Multilingualism is a means of self-identification, so we do seek to strengthen it. It is of great value to our people. On the next slide, you can see a flowchart demonstrating linguistic diversity in Kyrgyzstan. And one of our crowning achievements is that we've achieved a harmonious society, and a multilingual one at that. Languages are not juxtaposed. We don't think about our own language and foreign languages. We think about our own language and other languages. This other language is also harnessed for the purposes of achieving sustainable development. So, as you can see, all languages are part and parcel of the common heritage of the Kyrgyz Republic. Moving on. What factors can help us to preserve and promote multilingualism? Well, there are myriad factors, but the first is probably the potential, the cognitive potential of multiculturalism. The various ethnic groups are, of course, motivated to learn their own languages, to learn about their own cultures. Furthermore, multilingualism has traditionally been a means for people to get access to high-quality education, to get a good job, to access information, and so on and so forth. So the situation we have in the Kyrgyz Republic is unlike anywhere else. We have bilingualism. Currently, the Russian language enjoys the status of official in the Kyrgyz Republic. A law was adopted on the official language of our republic. So, in other words, the state protects the Russian language. What's more is 95% of Kyrgyz, 95% of Dungan, and 93% of Kalmyks have said that the Russian language is their second language, the main language of instruction in schools and universities. In fact, over 70% of higher education institutions in Kyrgyzstan teach in Russian. Also, over 3,000 schools teach the Russian language as part of their core curriculum. We conducted a sociolinguistic study back in 2018, and these are the results. Civil servants in the city of Bishkek generally have a good command of both Kyrgyz and Russian languages. In Bishkek, we also have statistics. Roughly 95% of civil servants can speak, read, and write Russian, as well as Kyrgyz. Multilingualism is, of course, part and parcel of effective integration of various ethnic groups in Kyrgyzstan. There are objective and subjective reasons for that. We therefore need to harness this potential in order to promote economic, social, and humanitarian ties with other countries. Foreign languages are absolutely necessary in Kyrgyzstan in order to be able to exercise different kinds of jobs. As a consequence of that, we have many public and private language schools. You've got English, Russian advertisements for language classes there. And often you literally stumble across advertisements as they're printed on the footpaths. Turning now to the educational system. As you can see on the slide up on the screen, Russian and Kyrgyz languages, as well as English, German, French, Korean, Chinese, all of those languages are taught widely. Over 18 languages are taught in schools, in fact. We have 462 schools which are at the very least bilingual. That's roughly a quarter of all schools in the country. Moreover, at tertiary level, there are some interesting projects. As you may know, in Kyrgyzstan, aside from Kyrgyz, Russian, aside from those ethnic groups, in the south of the country, there are a lot of Uzbeks. They make up the bulk of the population, and therefore the Uzbek language is widely used in addition to Russian and Kyrgyz. So there are newspapers printed in Uzbek, there are schools providing instruction. Almost 11% of school children are taught in Uzbek. There are even theaters. There's a theater which is all entirely in Uzbek. We've got other projects. We've got other projects also promoting Russian and Kyrgyz languages in Uzbek schools. At the university level, there are faculties and departments where there is instruction not only in 2 languages, but many other languages, many other foreign languages as well. The mass media also broadcasts in a variety of languages, including Russian, Kyrgyz, English, German, Turkish, Chinese, and Arabic. And there's a lot of content being created by various groups tailored to target audiences. 72% of our population speaks Kyrgyz. It's an ancient Turkic language, and despite all of the upheaval we've seen through history, our people have managed to painstakingly preserve their native language. And in fact, a masterpiece of World Cultural Heritage. In fact, it's on UNESCO's list of World Cultural Heritage. That is, of course, the Epic of Manas, over 1 million lines in that work. I do want to say just a few words about the library where I work. Up on the screen, you can see our alphabet. We're seeing the Kyrgyz language go from strength to strength in cyberspace. That's a priority for us, promoting it in cyberspace. It's also a priority for our library. We have 6 million works in 90 languages. Furthermore, we have 15 cultural centers working out of our library, and these centers promote multilingualism, not just reading, not just intercultural understanding, but language learning and multilingualism specifically, creating a multilingual environment. Additionally, we have some open educational resources which we've crafted in different languages, 6 languages. In fact, this portal is very popular in my country. By way of conclusion, I just wanted to say a few words about what are the issues we've come across when it comes to promoting linguistic diversity in cyberspace. First of all, we need to promote the creation of multilingual content and to broaden access to it in cyberspace. Next, it goes without saying that we need to train qualified experts, specialists in this sphere. We need to develop the software and to ensure that we work to protect the various languages through regulation. And as Mr. Kuzmin said, of course, we do need substantial resources. Thank you very much.
I think that was a great way to end on a very positive, heartwarming note, on a very successful efforts to keep up language resources. So I think we have time for a couple of questions without eating too much into the next session's prerogatives. So please. Yes, Mark.
Yes, thank you. Professor Prasad, you presented a case where you said the imposition of colonial and post-colonial influences have impeded indigenous people from sharing their knowledge and thus the prosperity that comes from it. And you mentioned as in your conclusions that we have to, of course, give them the land rights and do things so that they are less influenced by the other languages. In a model where people are making their choices of what they want, people, when the colonial and post-colonial languages were there, those people would have seen advantages of them, made choices themselves to go that way. So the solution wouldn't be to isolate them from those languages, but rather to work toward a stable bilingualism. Do you see any conflict between what I'm saying and what you're saying?
That applies to elite. Elites have choices to make between other language and their language. Whereas most of the people who are not literates in the modern sense, they are otherwise literate. They are the ones who have never made choices of any kind. They are imposed. They have no other way to deal with because their resources are taken over. Their other avenues are gone, so therefore they have no choice. So now if you allow them to live on their own, they will be able to sort out the way they want to grow, they want to develop. It is not that we have to develop others. Do we give our space to them? We don't. But we want them to listen to us. This is kind of hierarchical relationships cannot work if you want to protect multilingualism. This is my contention.
Thank you. So please keep the questions brief or comments. Yes, Adama. Anyone else, please? Okay, may I take the question at the back? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have carefully listened to Siva Prasad's presentation in regards to the indigenous knowledges and languages. I missed some areas because you said it's important to sustain the environment, culture, etc., in regards to let the indigenous people's languages be survived. What about these days in regards to the climate change where everything are changing? From the Arctic, my name is Michel Madal and representing the Linguistic Council in Greenland, Pan-Arctic. Many hunters and fishermen, etc., are talking about that their languages also is damaging because the environment is totally going to be changed. Well, what are your thoughts on that specific area?
So we have now the advantages of, in fact, I have known some tribes from where they get the pharmaceutical knowledge about the plants and other things. They make use of that. And even there is a kind of this thing, because we know in Andamans, when there is a tsunami, some tribes who were not in contact with the so-called mainstream people, they survived. Because they followed the animals' instincts and they have a sense of understanding the nature. They moved up to the mountains. Animals moved up. All those so-called highly educated, scientific and modern literate people, they died.
Sorry to interrupt Professor Prasad, but if you could continue the discussion in the coffee. So, couple more very, very brief questions, please. I think it's only fair to give everyone a chance. So, to any other speakers in the last 4 speakers? Yes. Yes, please. Adama, sure, please go ahead.
The question to you, Prof, but I will do it in French. Can you, no, Prof Prasad. Yeah.
Oh.
It was, well, thank you so much for the presentation. I have one question about, can you elaborate more about the language policy in India? Because my concern is to see that there is really a divide, a huge divide between maybe the 80 languages which are in schools and the others. So, do you have mother tongue-based multilingual education towards these indigenous people?
It is there.
With all due respect, sir, please, this is a huge question for the end of the day. So I think I respectfully suggest it should be addressed at the last discussion session, because we do have 20 minutes at the end of the next session, because we are already late for the coffee break. I apologize, but thank you very much. Sure. Thanks so much.
Good that we had time for questions. It's a good idea.
Yeah, it was, but now the coffee break's almost finished.
Yes, but we'll go fast.
Just 5 minutes, maybe 5 minutes more.
Yeah.
but we need this to give more visibility. For example, this guy from Zambia, I told him that
the affections of the country.
Translator.
Раз.
Sorry to remind you that no glasses and no drinks, anything liquid within the premises. So please don't get in with glasses.
No, it's fine. Let's, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, may I request the speakers to all come to the front? Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have our I think we have most of our speakers available, and therefore I want to Can we? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the first remark I want to make is to thank the translators. You see they up there behind the glass windows? Yes, give them a good hand. It is a long day for us, but it's even a longer day for them. We thank you very much for your very, very good service. The second, I want to address three groups this afternoon. The one is the translators, as I've done just now. The second one is you as the audience. Some things that you must please take note of. The one is that some of the sessions didn't have an opportunity for questions. And if you have questions from those sessions, please put it in writing, and you can give it to Mr. Jaco de Tooy over here. He has more or less the same hairstyle than me. And you can give it to him and it will be answered at some point. I want the speakers to also attend to one or two important matters. But for the group, it is important that we know that we're going to address SDG 4. This afternoon. So when you're in the frame of mind of where we are, we're going to talk about language, multilingualism in education and research, and it relates to SDG 4. It also relates to cultural diversity. And I'm talking to the anthropologists now. Education is being served by a language. Language in this discussion is a tool to deliver education. If we therefore do not understand the language, we are taking away the education of the next generation. So it's very important to understand the special link between education and multilingualism. I want to ask, he's not here now, but Dr. Evgeny Kuzmin and his team. Let me thank them with a loud applause now, because they did very, very well. And now I'm taking away from the speakers' time, because they do not need to come here and thank Evgeny every time, okay? If I'm talking to the speakers, you each have around about 8, 9, 10 minutes, providing that, one, you realize that after this session, there is a reception. So if you speak too long, the audience will become hungry and hangry, and we don't want that, okay? I'll try and protect you from the audience, but I'm also going to protect the audience from you. So thank you very much for that. And then my last remark is to please request you not to explain for 5 minutes how briefly you're going to talk to us. We understand that, just carry on and make sure. And can I please ask that no more speakers come to the front? We have enough now, okay. So if anybody else wants to speak, you can speak tomorrow, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in this position that the translators will be, and you can watch on that clock over there, for 3/4 of an hour. That's what we have. What we'll try and do is to request the speakers who will speak in Russian and French to maybe address us first, and then the others in English. Is that good with you? Okay. And we will not have a loose translation from the floor because she's even more expensive than those translators up there. Thank you very much. As agreed, Alexei, we're going to ask you to start off. You have your time.
Уважаемый господин модератор.
Mr. Moderator, dear participants, the speaker is speaking another language that the interpreter doesn't understand. I think in Karelian. I just wanted to say a few words in Karelian. I am from the Republic of Karelia, and for me, it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak in my true local language here at UNESCO. For 6 years, I was a member of the expert group on Indigenous people, and therefore I have a lot of respect for the right to leisure and breaks and so on, so I'll be respecting that today. I would like to begin by saying that academics have mentioned 3 key spheres for developing Indigenous languages and for their vitality. Now, this affects all languages, of course, but one major sphere is education, one is private use of languages, and finally, the media. That's the 3rd sphere. Now, recently, various modern forms of technology have been developing, and also, therefore, cyberspace and information technology such as the internet have become very important and must also be included in these 3 spheres I've mentioned. So let's say 4 spheres, which are all very important if languages are to remain vital and continue to develop. Now, I've been talking about Indigenous languages in particular, and language activists and the language community generally tends to work quite actively in all of these spheres that I've mentioned. Now, in terms of the rights of Indigenous people, there are various international declarations, such as the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which mentions the right to education, the right to one's own alphabet and written language, and the right to education in the local language. And these various ways of developing the language need to be sustainable and supported by the local culture. And likewise, the Indigenous culture needs to be protected. And many Indigenous people are active in terms of protecting their own languages. I'd like to cite Evo Morales, the ex-president of Bolivia, who in New York at the General Assembly mentioned the importance of Indigenous languages for the development of contemporary democracy. And it seems to me certain that Indigenous people are working hard in this area as well. On the slide here, you can see a woman who is voting. She's a representative of another Indigenous group in Karelia, and she's voting for the legislative body in the Republic of Karelia. A few years ago, we didn't have this opportunity. Local people weren't given information, for example, in the Vebski language. That's another language in Karelia. And they didn't get information in that language on, for example, the candidates standing for election. Nowadays, that information concerning candidates to elections is available or being available more and more often. Now, the year of International Year of Indigenous Languages has been very important globally, but also locally there have been some local projects to promote various languages. And in Karelia, for example, there was a year of the Karelian language in 2013. And this year also focused on Karelian culture. It was very successful, both in terms of the symbolic importance of the Karelian language, since we were able to show Karelians that their language is important, that it is a national and contemporary language, and can be used as a real contemporary language in everyday life. Over many years now, we've been talking about indigenous, processes to develop indigenous languages, various action plans, and so on, and also in terms of developing the year for indigenous languages. And in doing all of these activities, we've been underlining the importance of involving real people. It shouldn't just be a focus on academics and on specialists, but also the development of more local, small-scale projects that involve local language activists and members of the local population who, in concrete terms, do need to work to protect their languages and get involved in these activities we've been organising at the state level and so on. So I'd just like to say a little bit more about Karelia and the efforts we've been making. There's been a decision taken that a physical space is needed for the Karelian population to be able to come together and develop cultural activities such as braiding, for example, and, for example, the musical and theatrical events. Also, special nursery groups have been created where children are spoken to in Karelian. Previously, this physical space was not available. So they decided to create some funds and work together to raise funds. And this house that you can see was actually built over 5 years. And it's now a unique place where people from all over Karelia, but even from other countries and other parts of Russia, are able to come and learn about Karelian culture. And now other towns and other areas in Russia are also having the same idea. But this house was constructed by the local community. It wasn't simply a matter of finding money somewhere and building a house just like that. This was really a concerted effort involving intellectual and financial resources and really involving the whole population. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And here you can see this is the so-called language nest, where the Karelian language is being developed. Initially, parents were a little bit worried about sending their children to learn here because they were worried that there wasn't really an educational program similar to that offered in municipal creches. But now there are queues for parents wishing to enroll their students, and the language nest has become very popular. Why? Because, well, the house is brand new, but also here you can learn not only the Karelian language, but other skills as well. Because given there aren't that many Karelian speakers, it can be difficult for children to learn local languages, but here you can learn to speak both Russian and Karelian. Next slide, please. Let me also just say a little about some projects we've been developing in connection with the Indigenous Language Days, and we collaborated with Estonia and Finland, and as part of our work with these other countries, we developed an educational program for members of civil society, but we also discussed good practice for developing Finno-Ugric languages, and you can see the website here that provides information on the project. So here are a few cases you can see on the slide here. For example, internet TV in Seto in Estonia, and also cuisine taught in the Seto language. So here you've got a mixture of cultural and linguistic knowledge. Also here you've got some gymnastics exercises being taught by my colleague Natalia in Karelian. And this was extremely successful amongst women who wanted to do some fitness at home, and they could develop their fitness whilst also learning Karelian. Also here you have a cartoon in Karelian for children. And it's about somebody who's travelling from Pudej in Karelia to Paris. And it's a story that's told in Karelian for children. And finally, let me give you one more example. Next slide, please. This is also a unique project in Moldova, where some people who didn't have any funding but really loved their language decided to create a film in another minority language. The film is called Azor, and it tells you about the heroism of the people who speak this language. And the film was created by the initiators themselves. They got involved with various people who were able to help them, and the Ministry of Culture then included this film in their national film archive. And just to conclude my presentation, I'd just like to say very quickly that we have also created a large number of cyberspace projects, including a forum where we've discussed the fact that working alone, of course, we're not able to preserve languages and develop the use of that language in the educational system. And what we've really noted is that the state alone cannot be responsible for preserving a language, nor can language activists take on this job themselves. Rather, we need a kind of synergy that would allow us to mobilize local society in order to develop the local population's belief in their language, and in order to propose innovative methods that would, in an acceptable, culturally acceptable way, help to promote the language. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexi. Let me just find out, Diana, are you going to speak Afrikaans? Not Afrikaans, that's my home language. English? And Dorothy will speak, and Andras? English as well. Thank you very much. Dr. Kuzman, when you were not here, everybody were asking, where are you? And I said, because of your old age, you're going to take a rest. But we're very happy that you're back. In your absence, we enjoyed ourselves by clapping our hands for you and your team for the wonderful event. So you can... Daniel, please.
Mes transparences sont en...
My slides are in English, but I will be speaking French. At the outset, I want to greet all those in the fourth dimension. I'm sure you know who I'm referring to, but he did that before I did as well. I also wanted to thank Evgeny, but he's already been thanked, so let's get down to the brass tacks. Is it working? Very well. Most of the presentations you've listened to today stressed the importance of language policies. Many of these presentations talked about internet-specific language policies. This begs the question, how can we develop public policies Without having hard data and a diagnosis of the situation, how can we make progress based on these policies unless we have objective data about what's going on? Unfortunately, when it comes to languages online, there's not that much data. There are a few sources, and often these sources are awfully biased. So the biggest risk we run is either not having sufficient data to track the situation to see whether there's progress, or, and this is even more serious, is that we run the risk of crafting public policy on the basis of false data. And if the data is false to begin with, then we probably won't make the right decisions. That's what I'm going to be talking about. Let me put a very simple question to you. How many people who speak my language are online? What percentage of internet users, what percentage of French people are online? What share of web pages are available in my language? So the questions are as simple as could be, but the answers are very complex, in fact. We don't have reliable data to answer these simple questions. Also, the UNESCO Institute of the International Telecommunications Union, apologies, we do have data about who's online, how many internet users there are in each country, but when it comes to the breakdown by language, well, there's a dearth of data. Next slide, please. Yes, there are many answers, there are many sources, there aren't many sources, and they're often very biased, especially when it comes to indigenous languages, because more often than not, indigenous languages are not widely spoken, not always, but that is often the case, and they often do not have a big internet presence. As I said in my introduction, we do need objective data in order to be able to develop public policies. It's absolutely vital. So we see that we have a paradox on our hands. Now, this curve spans the period from 1997 to today. You can see the red, that is interest, constantly increasing, but the blue curve, as you can see, drooping. And these are internet languages. We had, for instance, observatory languages based at Nagaoka University. And there were a lot of statistics coming out of there. They unfortunately suffered because of the tsunami, leaving the door open to others, but there are very few sources. So how do people use languages? On WhatsApp, over email, internet content in various languages? We have very little data, and as I said, much of this data is biased. If we look at the breakdown of internet users by language and internet content by language, that's all we have. So this is a very complicated issue. Between 1998 and 2007, the international media said that the percentage of English web pages stood and remained at 80%, and there are other studies, and together with my colleague Mr. Prado, we found data showing which the share of English fell from 80 to 45%. Then in 2009, UNESCO published a study on this, restored some order, showing that English is, of course, dominating the internet, but the share of English web pages did not stand at 80%. It had, in fact, decreased. So if you're interested in this, please refer to that 2009 publication. Moving on. Today, we do have two sources which have been plugging the gaps. First of all, Internet World Stats, which gives us the 10 languages with the highest number of internet users. That's been up and running since 2004. And W3Techs, it's got data which is updated daily. They've been working since 2010 and since 2017, so it's very recent. There's an observatory, which I am the head of, has been working on this, and we've managed to get some data thanks to search engines. This means the data is more reliable. Although, of course, this has circumscribed the ability for some to search the web. So since 2017, we do have a wealth of indicators for languages with at least 5 million speakers. I'm going to give you some statistics. I do beg your indulgence. I'm not a linguist. I did, of course, look at the 114 languages we cover, but I don't remember each and every one of them off by heart. It goes without saying that it's part of my job to track the sources we rely on. For instance, Ethnologue is perhaps the most reliable source, linguistically speaking, but it's now very expensive, especially for individual researchers. So we have a source called Joshua, but we're not quite sure about that one. So there are languages where the data might be a little bit hazy. Some languages might be missing because of this issue with the sources. And there will be Serbo-Croatian mentioned. I'm not sure where the speaker from the previous panel is. I do apologize, madam. This is not my data. But at least we do have data on Serbo-Croat. If we'd broken them down, we might have seen the language drop below the threshold. So this comes from Internet World Stats. I'm sure that you have used or regularly use this source, but you should remember that it's not impartial. You should be aware of that. Another source, W3Tex. I have relied on it in my work. Here is a study we published, Mirroring Languages on the Internet. The website is funredis.org/2017, LC 2017. I'm not going to be telling you about the methodology. I'll focus on the results. But we did look in depth at the biases of the three sources, the three methods. I think that's worth looking at, but unfortunately we won't have time for that today. So let's turn to the results straight away. These are the indicators we looked at. 6 indicators: the number of internet users, the percentage, the content, use, internet traffic, interfaces, whether translation programs used, and so forth, and also information society indices. These are ratings which are attributed to countries. Are they doing well on participatory democracy, and so on and so forth? We transformed all of those kinds of factors into IS indicators. And then we have 4 macro indicators: capacity, power, gradient in productivity. Power, of course, is linked to the number of users, and then I divided power by the number of internet users and the number of speakers, which helped us to delve into greater detail. Now, I will now be speeding up. So the most powerful languages, so to speak, English and Chinese. Hot on their heels, they're Spanish and French, then German and Russian. They've basically shared the fifth place. Then we've got Arabic, Hindi, Japanese, Portuguese, Hindi, Malay, Italian, Urdu, Bengali, Korean, Polish. If you look at other sources, you'll get different data, and that's what we cover in the section on bias. These are the trends, but I'm just going to run through that, scroll past that. And top 15 in terms of capacity. Now, there's no surprise that at the top of the list we have Hebrew, Finnish, Dutch, Swedish, English, German. The countries, in other words, which have robust public policies on information society issues. Gradient, well, that's basically the same thing, but with the inclusion of the number of internet users. In other words, those who use the internet create a lot of internet content. Next, and this is actually my conclusion. Hang on a minute, I will just rewind a little bit. Growth. Back, yes. So the languages exhibiting the greatest growth. There are a lot of Asian and African languages. Now, fast forward. Data for Francophone Africa, ITU. So countries which very high internet connectivity rates, and that to an extent explains the difference in the languages. And by way of conclusion, the rating. So capacity. If the language enjoys the same power in the virtual world as in the real world, then that language is scored 1. If you're very strong online, you go over 1, such as Hebrew, Finnish, and so on. They're very powerful. And then high capacity languages: Czech, French, Serbo-Croatian, Polish, Japanese, Greek, Armenian. Next, we haven't looked at indigenous languages yet. Languages which have pretty good capacity, Alemannic, Bulgarian, Bavarian, and then languages, which we will be getting to indigenous languages. Where are they? Here they are. Guarani, and in fact they're ranked. They're ranked between 0.5 and 0.9. So they're below the 1, but they're doing pretty well. And then weak languages, in a pretty critical situation, between 0.3 and 0.9. And the extremely weak languages, I really want to stress that, extremely link. Now, I am getting to my conclusion. The field is open. It's not too late for us to safeguard and strengthen these languages, but we need robust, transparent indicators, which are not biased, not partial. We need academics, we need researchers to really work on this topic, not to focus on the marketing side of things, and to work at it relentlessly. That's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I agreed with the speakers that if one of them goes over time, they buy time from the next speaker. So, Daniel, you owe Yashar $200, please. Yashar, please.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, my topic is devoted to philosophical comprehension of multilingualism. Multilingualism, luxury or necessity? Justifying the need of multilingualism, they most often talk about political and universal rights, social and historical factors, psychological and cultural reasons, and so on. In my presentation, I would like to point out to know that linguistic diversity imposes not only certain obligations on humanity concerning its ethnic groups, but also contains serious dividends, sometimes associated with the survival of humanity in general. In this sense, multilingualism is not only and not so much a kind of luxury, but rather a vital necessity for humanity and corresponding governing bodies. My humble presentation is devoted briefly to it. Let's go to the very beginnings. What is a language? So can you second, please? Yeah. Too abstract for. No, previous one. Previous. Yes. Okay. Multilingualism is composed of a variety of languages, and any language is, in its essential consideration, is a systematic name of objects of being, objects of the surrounding and inner world. Next slide, please. In this regard, no language, no understanding of the world. Objects of being, which otherwise are simply a conglomeration of things, insurmountable, ununderstood, a conglomeration that cannot be overcome, in which it is impossible to navigate, a conglomeration in which a person feels lost and abandoned. For this reason, the lack of language means a lack of understanding of both ourselves, other people, and universe in general. Next slide, please. Language is a world by words. That is, any language is systematized set of words that correlates with the objects of the universe. It is an explanation of the world and the objects, labeling things of the universe. And what is a word? A word is a speech sign that designates the object, an object, although not directly. That is, sorry, back please. Between name and object, there are two filters: denotation and meaning. The denotation of the sign is the object itself, but meaning is the content of this object which we are interested in. Based on a preliminary analysis of the language, it becomes clear that despite of diversity of languages, all of them ultimately point to the same object, respectively. In other words, in terms of denotation of words, multilingualism is a diversity of unity. But from the side of another filter between the sign and subject, namely in terms of meaning of words, multilingualism is already the unity of diversity. That is, the same word can be given not one but different meanings. Our line of reasoning allows us to draw several extremely important conclusions that have a direct impact on destiny and possibilities of multilingualism. Firstly, what is the reason that sometimes people speaking in the same language don't understand each other? And what is the reason that when people talking in different languages understand each other? When is multilingualism possible? The healthy development of multilingualism is possible provided that, despite the fact that people speak different languages, they remain within the framework of common concepts, common understanding, and common logic. Figuratively, it happens when people speaking different linguistic languages speak the same logical language. When is multilingualism difficult? A serious obstacle to the development of multilingualism is the opposite, when people do not understand each other, even speaking the same language. It happens in cases when people do not adhere a common logic, common understanding in communication. The second conclusion is that each language, large or small, consists of millions or hundreds of words. It is always experienced in various living conditions. For example, in the Eskimo language, it's Russian people, northern small people, there are up to 100 names of snow and ice. According to this indicator, none of the so-called major languages is even close to Eskimo language. And this is just one example of importance of indigenous language. It is an experience essential, is impossible permafrost conditions. And some conclusions. Representing linguistic diversity, multilingualism, in a philosophical sense, is an example of logical unity. For this reason, multilingualism is most productive. Multilingualism is most productive only within the framework of mutual understanding, mutual respect, and cooperation. Each language, regardless of its vocabulary, each language, regardless of its vocabulary and distribution area, is always always a contribution to the world practice of human experience in various historical, geographical, social, political, and so on conditions. In this sense, multilingualism is the treasury of humankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Yashar. This was a very good lecture in philosophy to people who actually stayed awake. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your... I'm going to ask Martin Benjamin now to address us, and then we're going according to the program, Diana, Dorothy, and Andras. Is that good? Please.
Okay, and before I start, if everybody could please take out your phone, because by the time I'm done, I'm going to have given you for free a nice piece of software, an app for your phone, and also a book that I'd offer for you to put on your phone and bring on your computer and read. So, magic. No, back. I want to, I'm very happy to be here, and I want to start by looking at this picture that is on the program that we've all been looking at since we've been invited, and it's on both of the programs. It's on the websites. Now, please, thanks. Okay, and I want to ask a little bit about these women who we're looking at. I want to ask what language do they speak? And in this case, by looking at the labels on the label on the picture, I could see that they're speaking a language called Ma, which is spoken in Kenya and Tanzania, with about 1.5 million speakers, which is about the same number, since we're here in France, as the number of people who live in the second, third, and fourth largest cities in France combined. But what language does their device speak? It's either speaking English, maybe there's some Swahili, there's been some Swahili localization. What language should their device speak? Ma, probably, right? But there is no information technology in Ma as far as I'm aware. So the question is, here we are looking at these women, looking at that tablet, gazing at it somehow. Probably maybe watching a video in, maybe someone has put on a video in Ma or some other language. But they're not having content, and they're not actually able to use more advanced technologies in Ma. So how do we teach their devices to speak Ma? And more to the point, how do we teach devices to speak the 7,000 languages that we keep on talking about, beyond those top languages that we just saw listed? We need data. What is data? Well, data is words that have been digitized in a way that can be used within computer processes for this discussion. And how do we get data? And how do we get data for 7,000 languages? People say, well, Google does it, right? Google Translate claims to have 103 languages in their system. I've done a study that evaluates that, and I welcome you to download it, read it. You can't download it, but you can read it online. And backwards, please. So far, I haven't heard from their legal counsel, so I'm assuming that they realize that everything that's said in there is factually correct, even if they don't agree with the opinions that the article comes to at the end. Okay. So how do we get data? About a year and a half ago in Khanty-Mansisk, I gave a talk showing the things that we had in the lab that we were going to be doing at Kamusi, where I worked to try to get data from the crowd. And it was all, speculative. Here it is. I'm promising it to you. Then this past July in Yakutsk. I said, okay, it's almost here. It'll be out by the end of the summer, and I'm happy to say that what I'm showing you now actually is online. It's in the App Store, and you'll be able to download it. So I'm talking about crowdsourcing. I'm not talking about crowdsourcing for one language. I'm talking about crowdsourcing for now enabled for 7,000 languages. Now that's only part of a promise. There are still a lot of issues for a lot of different languages, but the initial thing, the initial steps are already there. We can take in data and start doing things for all 7,000 of those languages. And those QR codes will stay on there for the rest of the presentation. So. I'll show you a few of the games that we're working on, that we've already put on. So the idea is that we're trying to get people to take what they have in their heads, put it in their devices, which we can then use as data, and then we can use later on for translation activities and on all sorts of other things. I will only show you very briefly what we have. And a lot of it, the idea is to make it fun, so people really want to do this. So there's some competition speed. The first one is a speed game called Word Race. We show at this point in English. It'll be enabled to use another source language later on. You probably can't see it, but we've got the English word definition as it is in English, and then we ask people to provide the translation in their language, and people who do it the fastest, once a consensus is reached, get the most points. Okay. Another game is called Idea Packs. We have things that people are doing with packs of words that are related. It might be fruits, it might be nursing terms, and this is actually quite useful for terminology development. We'll get to that later on, I think. And then you get scored based on how well you perform within your pack and how well your language compares scores versus other languages. Another game called Quiz Me, which is more of a validation game where if we've got somebody saying that something is a word in their language, now we are going back and checking versus a random word and seeing if we get confirmation that way. Another game called Ducks. Right now we only have it working for Yiddish, but you have if we have data sets where we have, say, that something is supposed to compare to something in English, for example, we have a word that's supposed to be light, but we don't know whether it's not heavy, not dark, not full of calories. Well, we have people play and they match up what is supposed to be matching to what. Not games, but within the dictionary, and the software there actually has a dictionary that interlinks at a concept level 44 different languages and growing, and the whole point of this is to keep on growing this to as many languages as we can, so you can translate from any one language to any one other language at a very fine-grained semantic level. But back, please. When you go to a dictionary entry and you find that there is no term in the language, equivalent term in our data in a language that that you're looking for, if you know that language, you can suggest what the term should be, and then we'll work on validating that as we go through. So unlike, for example, Google Translate, where if it doesn't know a word, if it's not in their vocabulary, they just sort of make something up. We're actually going to go back to the crowd and say, okay, please help us build it. And if you have knowledge, share this knowledge, and that knowledge will be shared with your community down the line. And we also want to try to get definitions. I won't explain the game, but try to get definitions from people in their own language, because having a word in reference to English is not particularly useful for the people who only speak that language and who need monolingual dictionaries for their own language. Okay. Wrapping up. So what we've done is we've developed the technology to engage speakers, like these women, in producing data for Ma and for 7,000 other languages. But I want to problematize this, because this all sounds, a lot of what we're talking about sounds really good in principle, but as we heard from Vincent, these languages isn't even in the Sustainable Development Goals. So internationally, people here are committed to languages. We all know, this is the choir. But outside of the choir, there's a lot less commitment and certainly very little in the way of money. We've been talking about this, as Nashua said, for 3,000 years, but where are we? We can get together here in Paris. We can look at these women with this gaze of otherness. There's exotic women with the beads and the big earrings, and look at them looking at this technology and wonder what they're thinking and whether that tablet is an exotic thing for them. But can we get together the commitment to work with them, to make them partners in taking their languages and putting what they know to use for themselves? And that's the question that I'd like to leave you with. So there's the final slide as I walk off, if you haven't had a chance to take down the addresses. And the big point is data comes directly from people, but we have the technology to get direct data from people now for all 7,000 languages. Can we do it? Thank you.
This is the end of interpretation for this evening. Interpretation will resume tomorrow morning. Have a lovely evening.
Martin, for that insightful presentation. Diana Lavrinovic will be next. And let's hear a presentation. Thank you very much. You want to come here? You sit over there.
First of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude for organizers for inviting me to the conference. The list of endangered languages provided by UNESCO Atlas of the World Languages in Danger is heartbreaking. Deep pain must be hidden behind every headline. Every nation from the list, however vulnerable its language is suffering anxiety and sorrow due to the situation their language has appeared to be at present. What might the older generations of these nations feel while they are witnessing the disappearance of their culture, their ancestral spirituality and wisdom is fading away? They still must treasure the fragile moments of those times when they spoke their mother tongue fluently, when they were surrounded by native speakers, when community life was flourishing. I am sure the list of threatened languages and the speed at which they are descending from one classification box to another doesn't leave anyone indifferent. It is interesting to draw the parallel between the problem of indigenous languages protection and preserving the artifacts. Why are we protecting ancient ruins, reconstructing paintings, sculptures, establishing museums, but we don't pay that much attention to the indigenous languages? Why don't we preserve the languages in the person's immediate attention? My language is a minority language in Lithuania, Karaim. It is sad to admit that it is included in UNESCO's Atlas of Languages. Its vulnerability is determined as severely endangered. Karaim's self-designation is singular Karay and plural Karaylar, are ethnic Turks speaking one of the Turk languages, Karaim, Karay. The name Karaim here means both the name of the nationality of the Turk origin and the religion. Our religion is pure faith of Old Testament. The essential principle of the faith is to study Holy Scriptures independently. None of the explanatory commentaries on the Old Testament are recognized. Knesset is our place of worship. Liturgical ceremonies are held only in the native language. The spelling at present is the Lithuanian alphabetic letters and some additional letters adapted to the language sounds. We have been living in Lithuania for over 600 years, and it is our homeland now. In the 14th century, the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Vytautas, after his successful military campaign to the south, brought several hundred Karaim families to Lithuania and inhabited them on the Lithuanian northern borders and in Trakai. The men were skilled, loyal, and obedient to the law warriors. They guarded Great Duchy of Lithuania and served Vytautas faithfully. Thus, Karaim territorial remotedness from other Turk-speaking nations, communities, dense residents, next slide please, the goodwill of the Grand Duke Vytautas and the subsequent rulers, privileges granted to the community, all these conditions have contributed to the fact that until now, we in Lithuania have preserved our national identity. So the modern Karaim language, Trakai dialect, is mainly the 14th century's untouched ancient language. Let me recite an extract from the poem by Karaim poet Abrahamovich. Karai edim, karai barmen, da karai be ilme kleimin, karai lich be uyalmimen, özdinimni tashlamimen. Kim denin tashladi, sezunyu nutu, oladam tu vulder, tu varhau shader. I was Karaim and I am Karaim, and being Karai, I want to die. I am not embarrassed by being Karaim, and I don't leave my religion. The one who has lost his faith, forgot his language, he is not a man, he is like an animal. At present, our community in Lithuania is an ethnic minority that estimates about 250 people. UNESCO archive contains a 1-minute video about us, and it was the series of videos under the project Connecting Through Culture, Celebrating Diversity, issued 15 years ago. And so can you please go now to the video link? And I was the speaker there. If it is possible, so now I would like to demonstrate it here. So please.
Benim adım Diana Lavrinovic. Karaykamın var mı? Biz geldik Trohkali, Tovaga, 600 yıldır txarı. Anam ulusumuzun aşamağın bişirat. Kıbınlar bişirillerler koy etinden da hamurda. Tolturatalarını hazırlayan edbi, kıptayt kırıçıklarını da ortasında kıbının pişirçek işleyit. Yem indilat kıbındı, hamur kırının kıpmak sartın. Bu adet kaldı atalarımızdan kıbın karaylarga tirlegimizin biluşu.
Connecting through culture.
About 250. And here on the video was my mom, and I'm sending her greetings. She is watching a webcast online. So, as mentioned above, UNESCO's Atlas of Languages has classified our language as severely endangered, with 50 speakers. And unfortunately, over time, it may have already moved under critically endangered headline. In today's multilingual landscape, it is considered useless to know their native language. Why don't grandparents speak mother tongue at home? They hope that scientists will come and do the job, but not them. Without doubt, somehow we should involve grandparents to use language in the families and pass it on to their children and grandchildren. The regular attempts to revitalize it still are unproductive. Results imply that the number of speakers doesn't grow for decades, and the list of language carriers is getting shorter and shorter. Thus, it is highly important to raise awareness on a critical status of our language. If efforts are that fruitless, urgent measures should be implemented to protect and revitalize it. Otherwise, our language will make a crucial step down. Well, next slide, please. A crucial step down into the lowest classification grade, and the World Atlas, and will die out in reality. Next slide, please. Yes, and now next. Being a linguist by professional and a language activist at the same time, I research my native language on a voluntary basis. I continue the job initiated and started by my late father, Markas Lavrinovicius, one of the eminent personalities in our community. He was the Doctor of Science, Lithuanian Karaim Khahan, the chairman of the Lithuanian Karaim religious community. He made an important contribution to the language research and its revival. After he had passed away, I continued his last job writing the Karaim language Trakai dialect course-book, Jūs Karai Tilininiu Retuviu Troch Karai Suziu. The book covers language morphology with all its nuances, provides rich vocabulary, and contains a thorough grammar reference. Without doubt, the book is addressed to the native speakers, but also it must be of high importance for Turkologists to investigate our ancient language. Concluding, I would like to mention that, as we know, the International Day of the World's Indigenous People is observed on the 9th of August. Precisely this coincidence with my birthday date seems to me such a pleasant surprise, such symbolic and remarkable. Indeed, it is great pleasure for me to be here today, participate at the International Conference of UNESCO in UNESCO headquarters in Paris, speak to respected guests, share my knowledge, and introduce my nation language. And the last slide are my key points. So here they are. So I'm sure we should help Indigenous people find the motivation to revitalize their mother tongue, encourage grandparents to use the language in homes, to suggest supportive environment for native language teachers in communities, and monitor the projects held in communities by academia. Thank you very much.
Dorothy Gordon from IFAP, I think we must ask Diana's mother to present us with a recipe book for next year, and we can sell it and make a lot of money out of that. Dorothy Pokua. Yes, that is the name that you prefer, not this Dorothy one. Okay. Thank you very much. We listen to you.
Thank you very much. So this evening I'm here to present on introducing computational linguistics into Department of Linguistics in Ghana. And my case will be University of Ghana, where I teach. So depending on where you stand, whether you're a computer scientist or a linguist, you can, as a computer scientist, you can look at computational linguistics as a subfield of computer science that is dedicated to the processing of specific data. As a linguist, you can also look at computational linguistics as a subfield of linguistics that is concerned with formal modeling of linguistic knowledge for computation purposes. And it is an interdisciplinary field that combines linguistics and computer science knowledge. So what is the aim of computational linguistics? First of all, it wants to understand and generate natural language while focusing on capturing the power of human languages. It also aims at developing and providing computational models to account for several types of linguistic phenomena. So what are the two main academic parts? I say, if you want to do computational linguistics, then you have to think of, first of all, either computer science, whichever one comes first. So for computer science, you are looking at natural language processing, which involves interface systems, knowledge extraction and summarization, machine learning, example, machine translation, artificial intelligence when dealing with natural language. And for linguistics, you are doing this via formal models of language, for example, syntax, semantics, phonetics, phonology. So what are the aims for this presentation? I just want to discuss some of the major challenges that stand in the way of teaching and learning computational linguistics. And I'm focusing on my university, my department. And to also try and suggest some strategies that universities in Ghana can employ in order to introduce the teaching and learning of computational linguistics. So what are some of the challenges? The very first one is lack of expertise, and lack of expertise both on the part of lecturers and students. So let me take the part of students. So we start right from the high school. In the high school, when you are getting to the high school, you choose courses. So you have, taken myself as an example, I did pure arts in high school. So my course combinations were literature, French, and Ghanaian language. And so when you are getting into the universities, the courses that you've done in secondary school, that determines what you do in the university. So from a typical arts background, you are sure to get into arts-related courses in the university. So for me, I moved straight into linguistics, French, and English. So right from the beginning, we are not, the students are not well grounded in things like computer programming. You don't know much about this unless, of course, you did some computer science. In the high school, we are introduced to ICT, but it's very, very basic. I just remember sitting in my ICT class learning, okay, this is amounts, and this is this, and this is that. We didn't really have the detailed information that we need to do things like computational linguistics. On the path of lecturers, I'm a lecturer, so we've all, in linguistics department, we've specialized in diverse areas. So you have your psycholinguists, you have your phonologists, those into phonetics and all. But we don't have much training in computer science or programming. And on the other side, you also have the computer scientists who are also well trained in computer-based programs. So there's not that, we don't have that mix where you have a linguist who is into language and at the same time into computer programming and what have you. And you don't also have computer linguists, computer science lecturers who are also well-grounded in language. So we don't have the expertise as of now. Now, this feeds into accreditation of courses. Before the university can adopt a course, it needs to go through a whole accreditation process, and it takes a lot of time. First of all, they want to find out whether you have the expertise, you have the facilities that you need to be able to run the courses. So for my university, because we do not have the expertise, it's very difficult to get this course accredited, even though we've proposed that in the next few years we would want to introduce computational linguistics. Apart from that, if you look at the structure of our academic year, we have 2 semesters, and each is made up of about 12 to 13 weeks in total. And so it's during these 2 semesters that we are busy doing, all our courses. Now, during the vacation, we have like a long vac between May to August. That is where the university runs sandwich programs. And these sandwich programs are the programs that, fetch extra money for the university. So there's really no, space for example, if you want to run an extra course for something like computational linguistics. And then if you look at the structure of the university program, we don't have the opportunity to cross into other disciplines, especially for credit hours. So if I'm doing linguistics, French, and English, I'm following just that path. I can't go into, let's say, computer science or psychology to pick a course that will count towards my final grade point. So why would I want to go to the university and spend, 13 weeks going around picking courses that will not end up as part of my cumulative, grade point? So the focus is on the main courses that students are doing. So we are not able to have that cross-discipline thing. So to suggest some strategies, I think the lecturers need to be trained in computational linguistics, because we all look forward to a future where our kids and people will pick up the computer, and when they click, hello Google, you want to hear your language being spoken to you, you want to type in what does this mean, and then your language comes up. So we look forward to that. And the lecturers are very enthusiastic, ready to, be trained. So we need to train our lecturers in computational linguistics. Also, we do ICT in secondary school, so not really introduced, but it has to be intensified. We need to go beyond, the part of a computer and get into the details. If possible, get students interested in computational linguistics right from the high school. So they come and they get into the university, and even if it's not going to fetch them credits, they would still do it, knowing that, it's counting towards the future, what it's going to do for them. And then the university program should be structured in such a way that students can cross over. There are students doing things like psycholinguistics, and they are just in the linguistics department. If there was an opportunity for these students to pick courses from the psychology department, that will also count towards their final grade point. It would help. So the university should give opportunities for students to cross to other disciplines. And then I think rather than running just a 2-semester academic year, we can include, for example, a 3rd semester where students don't have to do all their credit hours in that period of 26 or 28 weeks. But then we have this long vac where if I'm not able to make up my credit hours in those 26 weeks, I can have another opportunity to pick up some other course. And that way, even if they are picking other courses like free electives, they can, you know, do that. And last and foremost, I think that, and this is to Dorothy, I think our class size, it is very, very difficult to teach something like computational linguistics when you are handling a class of about 1,003 students. And that is the first year class I handled. So it's very, very difficult. So if we want to introduce something like computational linguistics, then we will be forced to do it from maybe the 3rd year or 4th year, where you have a smaller number of people, because it's all about practice, hands-on experience, not just a lecture. So if there is a way our class sizes could also be reduced, that would really, really go a long way in helping us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pokua. I'm very glad that I'm not one of your students, because you are making them work very hard. Ladies and gentlemen, our last speaker for today is Andras Kornai. And we look forward to listen to you.
Thank you. So, since I'm the last speaker, I don't have to pay $200 to anybody if I run over. Okay, so I'd like to talk about the Ni Hao. Everybody who has ever heard of the Ni Hao before, please put up your hands. Okay, there are like, you know, 3 or 4 people. That's really good. So, okay, next slide, please. I'd like to first acknowledge a bunch of people. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the impossible situation of the Central European University, which is being hounded out of the country. I'm not affiliated with them, but I find their situation terrible. And for everybody who cares about academic solidarity, you want to hear more about it, please come to me after the talk. And then I want to thank by name a lot of people who have helped me with this work over the course of years. And you will see a preponderance of Finno-Ugric experts. I'm trying to do a lot of this on specifically on the field of Finno-Ugric, and not listed there, but I would like to thank in person Evgeny Kuzmin, who has made this work in that area very much possible for us. So again, a great hand of thanks for Evgeny here from me and from us. Next slide, please. So here is Ni Hao. If we could enlarge this somehow, I don't know if you can read this at this side. This is a small island, thank you, small island, beautiful island, about 180 square kilometers with a population of 180. And this is known, next slide please, as the Forbidden Isle, or Forbidden Island. This was already written on the Wikipedia page. So here's a description from 1961, a scholarly paper written in 1961. It says, the island of Ni Hao offers a unique situation for studies in Hawaii. It is 72 square miles in area, and it lies some 20 miles to the leeward of the larger island of Kauai across a very rough channel. Ni Hao has no airfield or good harbor. This has not changed. It has been a cattle and sheep ranch entirely in the ownership of one family, the Robinson family, for the past 100 years. During this period, it has a population of 180 to 250 people, almost all of whom are of pure Hawaiian ancestry. That was what Worth written in 1961, and now we skip forward half a century, and it says, can we keep the slide nevertheless? A few people, even Hawaiians from other islands, have ever set foot on Niihau. The housekeeper at Oriental Ranch Bungalow in Kauai cringed at the mere mention of the name and whispered, "It is forbidden. You cannot go there. It is forbidden." Okay, so to this day, the island is regarded as forbidden. People cannot go there, they don't go there. You really have to mount a super, super special effort. As an ordinary tourist, you can't. You have to get all kinds of permits from the Hawaiian Department of the Interior and so on, and negotiate with the Robinson family. You can't go there. Okay, next slide, please. So what's the language situation? The language situation is of particular interest to us because I'm taking now the part in italics. It says Niihau is the only area in the world where Hawaiian is the first language and English is a foreign language. Okay, you go to mainland Hawaii. I'm sure many of you have been. Please raise of hands who have been to Hawaii. All right, so about, I don't know, 20 times as many people. So in Hawaii, English is very widely spoken. You know, Japanese is much less spoken, but still a lot of foreign languages are spoken. And the Hawaiian language, although there have been tremendously good and positive efforts in trying to revive the Hawaiian language, and I'm not going to go into to these, and they are quite successful, one must say. The Hawaiian language is spoken by people. There is radio, there is TV, there is blogs, there is life, even digital life in Hawaiian. So it's not a language in immediate danger of loss. However, the Niihau dialect, which is of course small, again, it's less than 200 people at this point, is regarded by the Hawaiians themselves as being the pure, the best Hawaiian, the most ancient variety of the language. Maybe we can get the slide back. I'm sorry. Could we get the slide back? Yes, thank you. And this is a general phenomenon. It is not just in Hawaii that people think of the more remote and less accessible areas and think that those areas are the ones where the best and most ancient and most pure variety of the language is preserved. So people used to say this about Transylvanian Hungarian until sort of communication between these two parts became so commonplace and everyday that everybody realized that they speak for all intents and purposes the exact same language as the sort of mainstream Hungarian. Okay, next slide, please. So some very tentative conclusions here. First, so as long as there are live branches, the human sacrifice for saving a dying branch may be too much. So isolating a language is a human sacrifice. These people, they don't have decent health care. They have very little in way of education. Of course, the community is tiny. Well, the fact that the community is tiny is not a thing in and of itself. You know, humanity, large swaths of humanity still live in tiny communities. So that is, I don't see that as damning. But the lack of health care, lack of opportunity, there are things there from a human rights perspective that don't quite look right. So just to save a purer version of the language, this is not worth it. We should never, you know, institute policies that go this way just to save language purity. That's absurd. So conclusion number 2, if I may have the next slide, please. If there are no other live branches, then maybe leaving them alone is not such a bad idea. So last year there was in the press this sad story of John Chow, who was a Christian missionary, actually well prepared. He was not, the initial press reports made him out to be an idiot, somebody who is just a maniac who wants to, you know, spread the gospel with no knowledge, no understanding, nothing of the sort. In reality, he was very well prepared, as well prepared for this mission as he could have been. Nevertheless, he was killed. So maybe the lesson is that leaving these isolates alone is not such a bad idea after all. There is not just their human sacrifice, there's also the human sacrifice on the other side, so leave them alone. Okay, and the final conclusion is sort of the kind of conclusion that every researcher likes to make. More research is needed. Actually, people are not really fully conscious of the extent of this language isolates, where they are, how they are maintained, how their forbiddenness is maintained, but there are a bunch of them. It's, I've just, gave 2 examples, but there are dozens and dozens, and I would, people here are actually, very often familiar with language situations in a lot of areas. And if they know of such, I would appreciate emails or some notification. I would like to build up a catalog of these situations. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, look at the watch there. I think that the audience and the speakers are extremely disciplined, and I want to thank you for that. Let me see, if I'm going to open the floor for questions, who are going to put up their hands? Then I'm going to allow 1 person in this block, and that will be you, and 1 person in this block, and that will be you. And then I can never not allow the chairperson of IFAP to speak, so she will be the 3rd one. I must ask you to please keep your questions very short, because on that block, not this block, on that block, some people were falling asleep. And then when Andras mentioned the Forbidden Island, everybody was wide awake again. So I'm going to ask the lady, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you. We were definitely not falling asleep on this side.
We're not on this side.
I'm speaking
Yes,
for
yes.
everyone. Yeah. Nobody was falling asleep. But we were thinking about the champagne and stuff, what's coming. Okay. I have one question. It was very interesting. Thank you, everybody. But just one tiny question for Martin Benjamin. I've heard about the Camusi initiative. I think it's very interesting. But are you also doing crowdsourcing on the internet, or is your data resource method only the how do you say it? The ones you were presenting with the games and such? Because if you're doing crowdsourcing on the internet, you would need a lot of human input to validate and see whether the language is really the language you think it is. So how does that work?
Is this on now? Okay.
There you are.
Thanks. Some very short answers. Some of the things that are on the mobile app are going to be ported. Everything should be working together, but there's a lot of programming that goes, because programming in Ionic for the mobile app is different than programming in Angular and Node and other things for the web, and so we have to make sure that everything works in one place and then goes back to the other. In terms of validation, it all gets validated through various systems where basically the objective is to reach consensus. So we don't take the first thing that comes across the transom from one speaker of a language, but once we see the same thing several times, then we start to believe that that's correct. It goes deeper because there's not a unique answer in any particular language for any particular concept, but I'll take too much time if I explain it.
Thank you very much. Are you happy with the answer? Thank you. Sir?
Dr. Dorothy Agiampon. Yeah, Agiampon. Thank you, ma'am. Having been in the higher education academy for quite some time, I see the challenge you are facing introducing something like computational linguistics, given the rigidity of our secondary school education as well as the curricular provision in higher education. Do you consider a kind of complementary approach? Let the computing sciences grow, let the linguistics grow, but create a platform for them to understand each other and work together to be able to produce what you want to produce. I could say a big challenge wanting to get computational linguistics out of people in the secondary, given the nature of our curriculum provision.
Okay, with your permission, let me just listen to Dorothy's question.
Oops, sorry. I found the presentation on introducing computational linguistics interesting, but the fact is that other departments have done this around Africa. I know in South Africa you have a number of universities with computational linguistics. So I believe that probably what needs to be done is to see